Okay guys, so the first step that I want to show you is to make 3D forms. Since we are working with sculpture, we're going to make some three-dimensional forms. I wouldn't encourage you to use a full sheet of paper, so what I'd like for you to do is cut some smaller pieces to work with. That'll give you a chance to work on a smaller scale. This is still a little too big. So making creases and folds on your paper. These can be areas to help things structurally, as well as giving you guidelines for cutting. Alright, so my first shape I want to make with you is probably the easiest one, is just rolling it into a tube, creating a cylindrical look. So to get that to stay, the trick with the glue, and I mentioned in another video, is that the glue will dry fairly quickly. It does take a little bit of time for it to stay and be permanent, but by folding it over on top of the shelf and pinching it and giving it a little bit of pressure, you know, one thing I tell my students in classes often like to count to 10. But we're going to just do this quickly for our video here, for video's sake. Folding it. So the way to attach a tube like this to the surface is like attaching it to stand up, which makes it a little difficult, but you could also attach things so the shape projects away from the surface, like so. So I'm going to get some glue. And notice that I'm not putting an excessive amount of glue, just putting enough to apply to the surface and get it to stay. I'm going to hold it in place here. To get the tube to stand up, there's a different technique I'd like to share with you. Instead of putting glue on the surface of the paper and setting it in the glue, that would work if you were to leave it alone for a while and let it set up. But there is a technique called tabs, which you can cut out of a surface. So before I glue this on, I don't want it to project so far out of the paper, so I'm going to cut this in half. And this is how I would glue it together, obviously, to make another tube. So it's going to be a little smaller, make that cylinder. So, what we would want to make is a tab here. I'm going to fold over a little piece of paper and get it to stand up, kind of like an L. We call this a tab. And to make a cylinder stand up, I'm going to make a series of cuts on this tab. Another name for this would be making some flanges, and you could actually curl it around. And if you don't like the flanges to be on the outside, like this, you could curl it towards the inside and having those flanges hidden on the inside. So I'm going to go ahead and glue this together. Roll this around. And as I'm holding this in place to dry, going to apply glue on these little tabs here, and I just want to put a few dots and getting them on the inside as well. I could then place this below, and once again holding it in place for a few seconds. I got myself a cylinder that projects away from the surface. Working with other paper, I can try to create some boxes. Same technique of pinching to get the folds, but this time instead of cutting, I'm going to use it to help me with my structure. Working with the guidelines I've placed there to make my tabs. I'm going to cut on the folds, and depending on whether I want them to be hidden, I could either fold them outward or I could fold them inward. Alright, if I wanted to have them like this, I can glue that on in place to make a prism that stands up, or I could go the opposite way and use my guidelines that I've already folded in place to help me make this box. You could cut the tabs a little bigger on the opposite side as well if you wanted to make a box that closed on itself. But the idea is to press it, hold it in place, get that rectangular prism glued on. We'll see how this looks in the next video. Alright, so I've gotten 2 more forms added on here with the tabs going outward, so you can see the different looks. I did add a little piece of paper to help hold the prisms together. You could always fold one side of the paper to create a tab that will conceal or hold your form together, so the sides aren't opened up. And I want to make sure that you are practicing controlling the amount of glue that you pour out as well. We're not trying to get excessive with the glue, and holding them in place for a few moments. Shouldn't have to hold it for more than 30 seconds at the longest. Be careful about the amount of glue you have on your hand as well. That could end up causing some difficulty as your hands get messy, so having time to wash your hands every once in a while. So now I'm gluing on a rectangular prism that's flat against the surface so we can see the difference and see how there are some that project out and some that are on the surface. Another form would be to get a cone or to do a triangular prism. Once again, folding the paper to create those edges. I'm just going to fold it 3 times this time to make a triangular prism. You could fold it 4 times and overlap them, but I like the idea, not wasting too much paper. Notice that I did create a little tab for the glue to stick together on. Same process, holding it in place, and if I wanted to make it stand up and project out, I would need to cut on the corners to get some tabs to attach it to the paper. Putting glue on the surface and attaching it in that manner can work potentially, but it does take time and there's not as much paper that holds it in place, so it's not as successful. Notice in this one that I cut it at a curve on one side of the triangle, so if I curl this paper around itself, I can create a cone. You will need to maybe edit it a little bit. It is a little trickier to keep that pointed tip, and your triangle may need to be more. This right angle that I have here is giving me a really thin cone. If I wanted it to be wider, I might want to have a larger, like an obtuse angle instead of a right angle. That would give more surface area for the cone. If you have something shorter than a right angle, which we call an acute angle, you get really tight cones. This is all a matter of taste and purpose of why you might want to make a cone. What sculptural element are you creating them for? We'll put a little bit of glue on one side of that paper and curve it over. and you need to kind of manipulate the paper with your hands to get it to stay. And the wonderful thing about white glue is that it dries clear and you shouldn't have any residue left over. And this glue is much better than a glue stick, because glue sticks are great for gluing flat pieces of paper together, but the tension of gluing a form is the paper wants to return to a flat shape, so it's going to want to come apart. To get my cone to stick to the paper, I'm going to need to cut some tabs, and for a rounded shape you'll need to cut more tabs so it doesn't get those edges. And I'm going to fold these around, so I like it when it's folded inward much better. Alright, so I'm going to glue this on and you'll see it attached in the next segment of this video. So I got myself some tabs. It's not beautiful, but it's going to get hidden within the shape. So be careful about how you get glue on your finger, right?